everyone. And yes, welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Human Experience Podcast. You already know who it is. It's your girl, Rashida, aka Righteous Sun. And on today's episode, I look forward to talking about this because, man, everybody's talking about it right now. And we're all talking about our emotions. We're in our feels. So, yeah, this topic is beautiful for right now. It's all about reclaiming your energy and setting boundaries without guilt, which we all need to do, but we do from time to time. With that being said, let's get into it. And please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And yes, share with family and friends and those who you feel will vibe with this message. With that being said, let's get into it. Welcome, everybody. I'm super excited to talk about this because I'm learning this. I've been having a lot of conversations about this. And of course, I look forward to hearing the insight and the wisdom and the conversation and the chat from beautiful Brigitta, who is one of the practitioners on the Hero Collective. And I can't wait to have this convo. This is not the first time she's been on, so I'm excited because our conversations are always beautiful. And it really is just like I picked up the phone and I started chatting with a friend. So welcome, Brigitta. I'm super excited for you to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing. So excited for this conversation, to be honest.
Great. Yeah, so am I. So am I. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot from it. And then I'm going to take it away and be like, oh man, a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to process, get in my journal and start writing. Before we begin, please just introduce yourself because I think that now that I've had many conversations with you, your gifts and what you do ties into the conversations that we've had in the past. And I think it will also tie into this one as well. So please share your gifts and what you share with the world and what users can see and connect with when they go on the Hero Collective platform.
Yeah, so a little bit of background about me. So I'm a retired paramedic of over 10 years, a naturopathic doctor, and I transitioned into cranial sacral work. And I'm a quantum healer of brains, pains, and traumas, helping people birth their new version of themselves. And I love working, I think, being a paramedic for so long. I love working with people with trauma recovery. I started in concussion work and it's evolved and grown over the years into very different things. So, a lot of what I talk about, obviously, with trauma work is what are those healthy boundaries, right? So, it ties in so beautifully to this whole topic and conversation. And I'm just excited to have it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing. And of course, right away, something popped into my head as you were sharing your gifts and what it is that you do. You talked about that trauma and how you help people, not just on the physical, but it's like you're saying that the boundaries that we create can also heal us in the physical trauma as well. And not just even the physical, because, me, it's all like emotional, mental, spiritual. But creating those boundaries, where do you feel like people need to begin? Because when I think about it, I think so many people have blurred lines of what boundaries are supposed to look like or what they've been taught, right? It could be that they were taught something where you're like, no, that's not what boundaries are, but that was taught to you. And so you believe that that is okay, when in actuality, by the time you get older, you're like, that isn't okay. And it's actually affected me in all of these areas of my life and in my relationships, but I was never able to pinpoint what it was, right? We were just like, I'm hurt about whatever it is, but not realizing that you can also create those boundaries so that you can recognize it right away and cut it right at before it even gets there. So what is that one thing? And it was like all these different layers to what I just said, as always. But like, what do you think is that one thing for people when it comes to creating those healthy boundaries? Is it the physical, the mental, the emotional, or the spiritual? Or is it all of it?
That's such a beautiful and deep question all at the same time. Someone who is a recovering people pleaser and who was never taught boundaries growing up. I think for me, one thing I've learned over the years is when it comes to boundaries, it's like, what am I okay with giving of myself? Because I think when we give without expectation, right? It's like, what am I okay, willing to give, whether it's my time, my energy, gifts, whatever it is? And what am I okay with giving and never getting in return? So I think when I assess my boundary, It's like, how much of myself can I give because I am overflowing and have enough to give, rather than expecting there to necessarily be a reciprocal relationship, because that can often, when there's that expectation, that often leads to disappointment and then feeling
Mm,
like we've been taken advantage of and that boundary hasn't been honored. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think what I keep coming back to is like, how much of myself can I give freely? And that is where my boundary is. Like, if I never get this back, this never gets reciprocated, what does that look like?
yeah, I like everything that you said, which then makes me ask the question, do you feel like in relationships, a lot of the times where boundaries get crossed is because we're so much in that reciprocal, we're very much in that transactional way of interacting with each other when it comes to relationships?
I think that's a great question too, because I think it depends on the relationship and the dynamic of the relationship, right? Relationships ideally are not transactional. We're not looking at it like, if I give you this, you give me that. Ideally, what happens is like, I have enough to give and I nourish and support you, and then you are overflowing, and then it becomes this like, we pour into each other and we both spiral upward, right? Versus like when it's this transactional, it's like, I take, you take, I take, and then we're both being depleted.
Mm,
I don't know if there's a clear answer to that, but I think it's like, how do you find those relationships where, yes, your boundaries are honored and they feel like everyone is pouring into each other? And of course there's going to be a give and take, because we're never going to be 100% every day, right? That's just the reality. So but over time, does it feel like we're both supporting and pouring into each other, so that we're both growing and we feel supported and nourished in those relationships, versus like people are just constantly taking from us and we're giving?
yeah, it does make sense what you're saying. And I say it because I do feel that sometimes that's where boundaries can get crossed, is that if we don't know what a healthy relationship looks like, it might look like it is transactional, or we might see it as that, where in actuality, that's not what it is supposed to be. And then that's what you were saying in terms of the depletion, where in our minds and in ourselves, we're feeling like I'm constantly giving, but I'm not getting anything back. But it could also be that we've also believed or seen or have been taught to believe that it is transactional by what we witnessed, whether that's, I always say like from childhood, because I really do think a lot of it stems from there, because as kids, that you're watching other relationships. That's where you learn to an extent before you go out there in the world and you go to school. And even then, you're still trying to figure it out, right? But when you come home again, that's that foundation. And if that part is skewed in some way, then it can become very difficult when you go out there to build those relationships because it wasn't given in the foundation at home.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. I think that's just it, is when most of us have not been modeled a healthy relationship dynamic. It's something that we get to learn as adults.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. We do get to learn that as adults. I am now going to bring up another question.
Mhm.
When you talk about like we start to learn it as adults, it brings up the fact that we take a lot of that from childhood and we take it into our adult life, and then we are slowly trying not even just to heal, because Rima said it beautifully the other day, like it's not that we're trying to heal, like we are healing, and yes, that's good, but we also want to live too. Like we don't want to always be in this healing of like here, because it's not easy all the time, and that at some point you'll get into the space of like, I want to live too, I want to know what that feels like. And I say that because when we get to our adult life and we're trying to set these boundaries and then they get blurred, we do a lot of like fight, flight, or freeze, which doesn't give us an opportunity to communicate what it is that we actually really need or how we even feel, because we have all of the other things in our head of what was maybe taught from, childhood. And then we actually either have things like we feel that guilt, right? So because of the guilt, we run away, or because we're just like, I don't want to manage it, right? Or we choose not to say anything because we don't want conflict, we don't want to rock the boat kind of thing. So I think where I'm going with it is what are the things that we can do to recognize when it's not a part of, like, you know what, I just need to get away from this and move on and push this person aside, versus I actually need to address this, and hopefully we can find a middle ground. Hopefully we can communicate it and then build a stronger connection and understanding between two people. And then that's where the boundaries are created. And it's not creating boundaries from this place of like, I don't want you here or get away, you know what I mean? But like, this is where I feel safe. This is where I feel comfortable. Can you meet me there? And let's talk about it so that we're building for each other. It's a lot. But I like these conversations because you really like open it up, and then like my brain just says, what? Okay, let's start picking this apart. So
Yeah. It's a beautiful pickup art. Sorry, what was the question in
yeah,
there? Because I'm like, I can comment on that, those pieces
so
beautifully,
many
but
ways.
so many
Yeah.
things.
So my question would be is like, what is that point where we don't get into, when we're creating boundaries, we don't get into this fight, flight, or freeze mode? Because what happens when we
Yeah.
create boundaries, some people get defensive with those boundaries because they're thinking this person doesn't want me here, or this person's being demanding, or this person's pointing fingers, when in actuality that's not what it should be, and that's not really what it is. It's saying that like, this is my level where it doesn't feel comfortable anymore, and it's better to communicate that versus saying nothing in the moment because you don't want to rock the boat, right? Because then we can't create boundaries for ourselves, right? That's where people keep coming in, because you're like, well, you're not saying anything, and we need to communicate. If you communicate, then I'll know, and I'll either choose to be that defensive person and say, you know what, I'm out of here, or I'm willing to meet in the middle and be like, okay, let's figure this out.
And I think you kind of answered the question, because I think the foundation of all of that is actually having that communication and the maturity to have that communication despite the discomfort. Because so many people are, I find, are not at that point of even having that communication or that awareness, right? And when it comes to the nervous system, it's when we get triggered. And this is why we do so much of the work, right? Is because the nervous system is going to get triggered. And in relationships, relationships are meant to help us grow. So we are going to get triggered. That's the reality of a good, healthy relationship. They're going to make you grow. They're going to make you feel a little uncomfortable, a little sticky. Like, we're going to have differences of opinion. And that's good because you want to be different. Like, you don't always want the same, because then it's like, okay, we agree on everything. Great. Like, where's the room for growth, right?
Mm,
So when we're actually disagreeing, our nervous system is going to get a little triggered, which means it's going to get dysregulated. So it's like, how where in my toolbox do I need to pull up my tools to then help regulate my nervous system? And do I need to say, hey, I just need a couple minutes, go do what I need to go do to
mm,
regulate my nervous system so I can come back and communicate from a place of actually being like, okay, this is what happened. This is how I felt. Can we discuss the boundary, or what I'm comfortable with, what you're comfortable with, where we disagree? How can we meet in the middle? Or do we just agree to disagree on this topic? And that's where we leave it for the moment, right? And I think it comes back to all of those things. But at the end of it, it's about communicating your needs, which is also a boundary, right? So it's like understanding and that awareness. And I was having a beautiful conversation actually this afternoon with a soul sister of mine, and she's like, we can keep going to the therapy and doing the work and like digging into the old stories and the old patterns, but at some point there's that integration piece and putting it into practice,
mm,
right? And actually working through those things, and not just like spinning on the hamster wheel of like talking about it, but like, okay, this is the pattern. How do I show up in relationship that, yes, this pattern might get triggered, but how do I work through it? Because that's actually how we move forward in life, right? The awareness is fundamental, and we can't necessarily change if we don't have the awareness. But then it's like we need to integrate that at some point, and that happens by actually taking the uncomfortable steps to
mm.
change the patterns,
Yeah,
right? And that also involves communication
yeah,
and awareness. So you've answered a lot, right? And I think I feel those are the pieces
yeah.
to it.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially we were just talking earlier about that eclipse. So many people are feeling in their emotions
Hmm.
and the feelings have to come out, right? So that awareness that you're talking about, we're now becoming more aware of our feelings and not just our thoughts. Like what you said, the nervous system, we're paying attention to that. So whether that's just being activated right now, and it does feel uncomfortable, those feelings. But now, what is asked of us is to communicate them, right? Even like what you said too, even if we don't even know what that is, right? We've never been shown how to communicate. It's never been like a thing that has been positive in our lives. So, because of that, we choose to either not address it. We might be aware of it, but I love how you mentioned the pattern piece, because I think that's also coming up a lot in this season, is that like we're all paying attention to the patterns because the feelings that come along with those patterns are the same. And so we're like, okay, well, why am I feeling that way? Because it feels like the same things that have felt before in other relationships. And then the communication piece really ties in there to say, okay, like, especially because we're going into the spring equinox. So it's like, you got to let it go,
Yep.
let
Leave
go,
it in last year.
step into now, because this is the moment of big transformation. This is the moment of really shedding a lot of that old skin. And when we say the old skin, it's the old energy that comes along with that skin as well. That is like, let's wipe it clean and
Hmm.
feel fresh. And I definitely comes through is like feeling fresh and new, feeling alive. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for helping me to pick it apart.
I love the way your brain picks things apart. It's just so beautiful. I feel like, I know there's a question there somewhere, but the way you just describe things and dive into it is just, I love the way your brain works.
Appreciate it. Thank you. But it's because of people like yourself and practitioners, honestly, when I connect with people, I love to hear their perspective, which then opens me up to another way of looking at, like another layer of looking at it. I see it this way, but then the way that you say things, as I get goosebumps, I'm like, oh man, I didn't know. Okay, now the flower's opening up even more. Okay, what's this petal look like? What's this look like? Okay, so then this ties into this other question now. When it comes to your gifts, how can you identify, or how do you identify those moments when you know, when you have clients and people come in? How do you identify how, though? I'm sure you can look at them and be like, this is affecting you on these levels, and these are the things that you need to do, especially when it comes to boundaries, because you did mention that whole give and take, that after a while you feel the depletion. And we know that when we start to feel the depletion, we feel it in every area of our life. And then it affects us on this physical level. So, when is it that you notice with your offerings and gifts that setting these healthy boundaries, or at least addressing that boundaries need to be set or have been crossed, and it's affecting them on the physical level?
That's a beautiful question. I think a big piece of, how do I say this? I think most of us, boundaries are a work in progress, right? With everyone. I think, and it changes from relationship to relationship. And I think sometimes it's, especially working with mostly women, because it's mostly women that will be in the complementary health space that seek out that sort of care. Women are natural givers, right? We, to our children, to our families, to our job, to all the things. And it's like, where's that boundary where you just can't do it anymore? And where do you get to say no? And also, yeah, I think that's a big one, is like, where do those boundaries start for some people? And everyone has different, some people have none, and some people are working their way through boundaries. So I think it comes back to really seeing, when we continue to give and we give, we're depleted, our nervous system becomes completely, those pictures of burnouts. When we see things like the thyroid issues, we see even things like weight gain, and people that are having difficulty losing weight, because weight in and of itself becomes a protective barrier when we don't have those boundaries. It's that cushion, right, between the physical world, and it creates that space energetically as well, physically and energetically. So there's so many different things. Our thyroid and our throat chakra, like, what are we not saying? Right? There's different places where our body holds these energetic pieces. Yes, it's in the physical vessel, but there's so much that we see. And then of course our brain, and just like literally that overthinking and that hamster wheel that's like constantly going. And you can see it's like they have such a hard time even shifting into that parasympathetic state or that theta brainwave state when we're doing cranial sacral work or quantum healing, right? You can just feel like the energy along that, well, in the brain, but in the nervous system as well. So it shows up in so many different ways. Chronic pain is often one as well,
Mm.
just different pain syndromes and how the body is screaming for attention. And so it's different. Once again, like we can go over the whole body and all the organs and it becomes very lengthy, but a lot of times it is a lot of overgiving and a lot of not listening to our body, which then means if we're not taking time and space for our body, that energy is often going to somewhere else or someone else, right? So it's almost like people put their needs last because they're like, well, my job's important, this is important, that is important. But it's like you take your car for an oil change regularly and you do all those things regularly. But like, what about your own? And when I say self care, I don't mean like a pretty bubble bath, but it's like, when are you doing those things like boundary setting and saying, like, hey, this is my capacity. I can't keep giving, right? Or it's like trying to run the car on an empty gas tank, but yet we do it to ourselves all the time. And then our body starts to scream. And then it's like eventually people are like, oh, I should probably pay attention to this. And it's often a boundary that hasn't been honored because they haven't listened to their body or taken time to listen to their body because they've been giving and giving and giving. And a big part of boundaries and that balance that you spoke of before too in relationships is there's the giving, but then it's also the ability to receive. And I think as women, this is often where we struggle because it's not something that has ever been really shown to us, right? To be in that receiving energy. Because so many women are holding up so many different, let's call them positions or jobs or whatever it is, right? So we're constantly giving of ourselves, but how do we actually allow that receiving? And that's a big shift. And that's a big shift for our nervous system too, to feel safe enough to lean back a little bit and receive rather than
Mm.
having to go and strive and do and get, right? So does that answer your question as far as the
It does.
physical?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm like, I feel like I talked around that piece as
No, I
well,
like you
because
with
there
that.
isn't one specific answer, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of pieces to it.
Yeah, I do appreciate how you share. You do the same thing. I like the way your brain works because it dives deep into all the layers that I just asked because I never know where it's going, but it always then brings out another question that I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Um, because I love how you mentioned the whole women and that female energy has been taught to be the nurturer. But I also feel like it's we've been taught that the woman is supposed to nurture in a way that wasn't set by us. It was set by men, like the patriarchal system in society. It was set, to label it as this is what it should look like. But that was then, and this is 2025. And things have changed from then until now. And we've added on so many other things that now it's not just, how people look at it back in the day would be like, women is home and
Mm-hmm.
taking care of the house and the kids and you know what I mean, that nurturing piece of keeping the energy of the home and all of that stuff that like because the fluctuation of like finances and how everything moves and housing and all these other things now that not everybody has that opportunity, especially even in the Western world. Doesn't matter where you go, doesn't have that opportunity to just focus on that. We now have to take on, or we've been told that you have to do this and then you have to work and you have to figure out all these other things. And in that, we're also going to ask you to nurture. We're going to ask you to nurture all of these things. But don't forget, find some time for you. Just like what you said, that whole like bubble bath, that's what they portray as that like nurture yourself in this way kind of thing. Or, like Mother's Day is coming up and that's when you can get pampered. But all the other time, like, forget about it. And I say that because like now we're in a time where it's like, well, how do you learn to set these boundaries that nurture yourself in a way that isn't set by other people and it can be set for yourself? And it's not, I always feel like you need to express that to you first before you can express that to everyone else. Because the truth is, if society has been giving it out like this, all that tells me is that, like, whoa, as we've all been feeling this pressure, right? Just like what you said, all these other things are tagged on that we feel like we have to do, and give. And if we don't do that, then we're not enough in whatever way. And then we feel shame, and then we feel the guilt. We turn around and we give ourselves that one little thing, but we then feel guilt because we feel like we've taken it away from something else or someone else. So my question would be from that is, what can we do now in these times to figure out a way? Like you have said, it's not just the bubble baths, but also just recognizing that in those moments of now in 2025, almost like we have to debunk or break apart that system that was created for us and now integrate into a new one. And I also think I say it too because I feel like that's what's happening right now. I feel like we were in that and now we're all bombarded with all these things and we're like, you know what? None of it actually resonates with my values now because I've seen all these other patterns and it just doesn't align with how I'm feeling and maybe what I thought I needed. I actually don't need that. And I need something else that actually feels far more uncomfortable, which we said, right? That uncomfortable feeling of communicating things where we've just been so used to, like, we'll just keep it bottled up and we're just going to keep going. But it affects us on the physical level.
Percent. Sorry, I apologize. I'm like, what was it?
Yeah, that's okay.
Once
That's
again,
okay.
you're like beautifully, you're like it, and it does affect us on the physical level. And there's so many pieces to what you were speaking to. So my apologies. What was your
No,
question?
that's okay. That's always, yeah, that's just me like listening to you and being like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." Like, but knowing that we're in 2025 and we're slowly releasing a lot of those old ways of thinking that have been taught to us, what is it that we can do now to integrate that, knowing that there are things that we can't be the state, you know what I mean? Like the truth is, like, not everybody can just stay at home and take care of the kids and whatever. Do people do have to go out there and work, right? It needs to be like, some people, it needs to be like a two income family. They can't do that, but at the same time it's about finding that boundary so that you don't burn out, right? So that you are feeling whole as you continue. But I do feel, I say it too because I just feel like a lot of people out there are trying to find that and they're unsure of what that even looks like, because so many people are like, well, it's easy for you to say you can do it like this, but like, I do believe now that we're in a time where it's like, well, we have to get out of that way of thinking and start thinking like, okay, in this time, even though I have to work, what can that look like for me where I can still feel like I'm setting healthy boundaries and giving back to myself?
And I think you hit the nail on the head. It is that individualistic approach, right? And it's the way healthcare and actual health should be as well, right? It's going to look different for each one of us because everyone's situation is different. And it's what works for you may not work for me because our dynamics are completely different, right? So it comes back to like, okay, what are those boundaries that are need? What does that actual real self care look like in and amongst everything else? And who can I, part of boundaries is also allowing and even asking for, right, other people to take on responsibility and roles. So even as a mom, right, and I think the pendulum has usually swings like so far one way and then it swings back kind of the other, and we try to find this like medium somewhere. And I think we've gotten to a place where things have swung so far one way that, like you said, it's like we realize like a lot of these systems and structures are not working, yet we're still sort of trying to exist in them for the time being.
Hmm.
And so it's like, how do we find that sort of balance for ourselves? And that balance is obviously going to shift and change even daily or weekly or monthly, right? And it's constant change or refinement. And so, what does that look like? And those boundaries may be asking people to take on more responsibility, if possible, within the home, right? Because I've seen, I can speak to my childhood, and it's like we were like the key generation, that like the shoestring and the key generation, right? It's like in elementary school, by the time, most of us were in like grade 7, we were taking care of our younger siblings. That was just the reality, right? And so a lot more responsibility was placed on us. And then I think it's almost gone so far the other way where we're just talking about this. You don't often see kids on public transit, not in North America anyway. In Europe, you do. It's very different, right? So it's almost like there's so much. then that falls back on the parents because these kids aren't given certain responsibilities, and everyone's going to be have their different levels of comfort within that, right? But it's like it's okay to actually give some kids some responsibilities and some life skills that come with that, because then I've also seen, even in the coaching world and working with kids that are away from home, it's like you have 16, 17, 18-year-old like teenage boys who are almost men that can't fry an egg, and you're like, these are
Mm,
like basic life skills, right? Like,
mm,
so, and that's just one example. So it's like, how can we start to shift some responsibility back to, and actually, it's not just responsibility, but it's also life skills and
mm,
empowerment, really, because when you're giving these tools and skills back to kids and you're raising them with this responsibility, then they themselves become more independent and more self reliant. And yes, they can still come and ask you for help, of course, but, and it might take a little bit more time
mm,
when you're actually teaching them, but then it's like maybe things do get a little bit easier and you can shift some responsibility, right? And that's just one example, but it's like finding, okay, how do we need to shift this, maybe as a family unit, maybe for myself, maybe in our relationship, whatever that looks like. And everyone, once again, it's going to be very individualistic, so it's like, but just kind of seeing like, okay, what does that look like, so that I can then have a little bit of time and space back to me, and I don't have to do like everyone's laundry, this, that, blah, 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 right? As a mom, especially if, because once again, a lot of times it does come back to women, because like you said, we're no longer, most societies are no longer in that structure where it's like the male is the sole income provider, the woman is then taken care of in that way, and then she can be the nurturer for the kids, right? So as that shifts, really what's happened is she's actually taken on more roles, not less. And so it's
mm,
like, okay, how do we shift that again? Because then really where we are seeing a lot of, and this is where we see a lot of chronic disease, right? And autoimmune disease. It's not the body attacking itself, because that, though our bodies are smart and doesn't attack ourselves, it's our body screaming for help and trying to tell us something. So then it's like, what is your body trying to tell you if it is in that state of disease? And how do you shift? Like, it's so complex. How do you shift
mm.
those
So much
dynamics,
to
right? And
that.
it's, and that really is, when we look at health, there's so many determinants of health. And it's not just one thing. It's not just me giving you a supplement. It's not just me doing this. It's like, what do we have to also look at to shift and create health from a very fundamental place? Because then that comes back to nervous system regulation as well, right? And if the nervous system is dysregulated, then it's really hard to build on that rocky foundation, right? So
Yeah, I get it.
there's this whole, it's not like
I
there's
get
just
it.
so many layers to the picture that we have to look at, and that those are the true determinants of health, really, is when we start to look at these bigger all-encompassing framework of health, and what does that actually look like.
Mm,
Yes, we can, supplement and, kind of band-aid for a while, but then it's like, what actually needs a big shakeup and a restructuring to make this more sustainable long term, or to shift things long term? Or if okay, something's going to shift in like a couple months, and you're like, okay, like whether it's a situation, whatever it is, and sometimes you do, right? You just get through it, and then you're like, okay. But most times it's more long standing than that. So what do we actually need to look at overall? And I think it comes back to that holistic approach too, and the family dynamic and everything else that's involved. So, because
thank
really, if we look at it, we're not supposed to be this isolated, right? We're not supposed to be this isolated. And isolation in and of itself is actually so detrimental to our health. So we're not supposed to be isolated as a single individual, as family units. We're not meant to, we're meant to have community and collaboration and support. We're not meant to mother alone. We're not meant to do any of these things alone. So it's like our modern society has structured it that way, but that doesn't mean that that is normal or healthy. So it's
mm,
also that reassessment of like, okay, well, can we sort of create that support system in a different way in our modern society, right? Like, that's actually how we're supposed to be doing things.
yeah, I get everything that you just said. Everything that you just said, I got everything. You made so many amazing points there. I loved how you just spoke on that piece of it's not just about giving responsibility, right? It's also empowering them to know that they can also do that, right? Because if you do everything for them when it comes time to adult life, and they, my kids are getting excited about adult life, they want to know. But because society is so different now, like back then, yeah, you would just like latchkey kid, you'd figure out whatever's for dinner, you'll just open the fridge and make something. That creativity piece of putting things together is lost along the way. And then, like, I think also that's where that anxiousness and that feeling of like being overwhelmed comes in, because now you have technology and all of those things that kind of interfere with the things that we would naturally have done because we didn't have it, right? Like I would just sit there and watch my mom cook, or you would go out there and just create an adventure, rather than being isolated, which is exactly what you said, which doesn't give anybody that opportunity to really explore who they are, like the comfortable and the uncomfortable piece. So I love how you mentioned that. I also loved how you added in just talking about the importance of, because you talked about the autoimmune system as well. And what came up for me was not just that, like, it's telling you, but it's like a self preservation, right? It's trying to preserve the body, right? So that's what happens when we get that kick in the butt, when we're like, okay, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Okay, here, let me take that vitamins and do all these things. It's still not enough because there's deeper levels that we still haven't addressed. And then we're like flat on our backs, right? We're like, okay, our body said no, like I actually need you to take care of yourself. I actually need you to rest. And in order for that to happen, the body had to go. And I don't even think just the body. Yeah, I do. I think it's the body having to self preserve, because I always believe that the spirit is always moving in this like flowy state, but very fast. And our body has to catch up to, I don't want to say the evolution, but the growth that's happening there. And I think that part is something that I love that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's like there's this beautiful saying, it's like at first it whispers, then it nudges, then you get the freight train.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? So it's like if you don't listen to the first couple whispers and then the nudges, it's like you will be flat on your butt because your body needs you to listen and pay
Yeah,
attention.
yeah.
Right? And that's usually when most people are like, "Oh, I can't believe this is happening." And it's like, well, you probably had some sort of inkling something
Yeah,
was
we
not right.
did.
You
Yeah,
just
we
didn't listen.
we usually did have that. That is funny. We usually end up figuring that out after we're laying flat on our backs, and we're like, maybe I should have done that. I just kind of love where this conversation has gone. Can you then give, like, what would be the advice that you would give to? I love this question that's coming up. The advice that you would give to those right now who are needing to let go, because I think in order to create the boundaries, you also have to let go of things. But if we are in that space of resistance, because to communicate feels so uncomfortable, right? It brings up whatever triggers. Like, what would be your advice in order to let go? Because I feel like I'm asking that question because right now we are ready to go into the spring equinox, and the letting go, I don't always feel is like letting go of that person or letting go of that relationship. I do believe that relationships come into your life for a reason, to teach you some hardcore lessons, because it's mirror images that so many of us, we are aware of, but in some ways we're still trying to decipher and figure it out. But I do feel like in this time, we can see it because we can feel it, right? So right now, I do feel like the energy is like it's time to let go, and it might not be let go of like the external. It's like what's going on in here that you need to release, whether that's fear, whether that's doubt, whether that's shame, guilt, whatever. It doesn't feel good and feels like my nervous system is like out of whack. The nervous system being out of whack, I don't feel is because of the external. It's things that we are working on internally that needs to be addressed so that we can stand firm, like what you said, and create this grounding and confidence within ourselves that we can safely create these boundaries, knowing that there will be people there who understand. And even if they don't, it still teaches you lessons of like, well, you know what? I stuck to it, and Even if it doesn't work, it's taught me lessons and makes me realize when I go into my next relationship, it will look very different than this one.
I think the piece that's dropping in is that setting boundaries, and as we continue to set those boundaries with different people, they're going to feel uncomfortable. And it's going to feel uncomfortable in their nervous system. And it comes back to anytime we do something new, our nervous system doesn't know the difference between that excitement or that fear, right? So it's coming back to like it's going to register very similarly. So your nervous system might feel dysregulated the first time you say no to someone or you set that boundary, and you might disappoint them because that is their expectation that they placed on you. Coming back to what feels true and good for you. And I think when we've been used to chaos and dysregulation or whatever it is we've been used to in our relationships, right? And I think that's coming up for a lot of people. It's like when it starts to feel safe and different, sometimes that can feel a little boring. And then we start to question and we start to wonder like, oh, is this actually like what is this, because I'm used to this, right? So that difference and that check-in of like, okay, this is an old pattern, this is how I'm used to feeling, this is different. And that actually just sitting with it for a minute and being like, it's not boring, it's not whatever it is, it's actually just safe, but you've never felt it for the first time of whatever boundary that you've created around in whatever relationship it is, right? So I think that is the piece where it's now training your nervous system in a different way and to actually have those experiences. And then once that new experience and that feeling is anchored into your nervous system, then anything that doesn't feel like the previous stuff will then feel really yucky or off or however we want to describe it. But that has felt so familiar for so long that when we step into that new is going to feel really different and maybe not comfortable, but that doesn't mean you're not on the right track.
Mm.
And so it's that recalibration of the nervous system too, right? Where it's like, it's almost like we sit there and we wait for the other shoe to drop because we're so used to it dropping before. Right. And it's like, how long do you need to wait before you can actually just be like, I can breathe, like it's not gonna drop, that fear, that guilt, right? Like all those feelings that don't come up, or just like expecting whatever to happen, right? And just always asking ourselves, like, okay, what do I actually need to feel safe in this situation? Right. And that can look very different. And that comes back to boundaries as well. And also, I think that once again, back to that energy of like striving versus like allowing ourselves to be, right? And this came up as well in a beautiful conversation today. It's like, we can keep striving and growing. And it actually came up around money. And, those people that they might have like X million dollars in their bank account, but they still have financial worries. And it's like, what do we need? Like, at what point do we allow our nervous system to feel safe? Right. And so you can apply it to anything. And it's like, at what point do we allow our nervous system to feel safe? And that's a constant check in that we get to do. Right. Because for some people, it's like, it's never enough. Like, no amount of like sense of safety is going to feel enough or, supported enough or whatever enough. So it's also comes back to that awareness piece of like, okay, what does that actually look like for me? And that check in when we strive to get where we wanted to be a year or 2 years ago, like, have I actually gotten here? Like, can we just take a moment and acknowledge and appreciate this? Right. And how different that feels. And I think it's just understanding that just because there is discomfort, it doesn't mean it's wrong. And
Mm.
sometimes the new unfamiliar feelings that we actually want to experience are going to feel uncomfortable because they're foreign.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Love that. Also, I feel like it's a lovely way to end it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things came up there. I love how you mentioned the safety piece. We're so used to feeling this way that when we feel this way, it's so scary. And we're so comfortable with feeling the unsettling and the nervous system being dysregulated. The feelings like I always say it's like if you're anxious or anything, you're feeling it up at the upper chest area and the neck because you're not communicating things. You might feel like unstable in the root chakra. You don't feel stable in your grounding. And the unfamiliar as it is, it also feels safe in this way of like stillness, right? It can be like this, not feeling like you're always having to get to the next thing, just like what you said, right? That you can actually sit somewhere and not wait for a shoe to drop, right? Just feel like I'm here. I'm in the present. I'm in my being. And I love, love, love how you explain that entire thing. Thank you so much.
My joy, my joy.
I can't wait for this episode to air because there's going to be a lot of things for people to ponder and think about and go back and, like, I hope be able to reflect on it in their own personal life and their relationships, especially as we are moving into this equinox. It feels like a different energy. Personally, I don't know about you, but it definitely feels like a energized one, and one where it's like, are you all in or you're not?
Yep.
And I think this conversation really has helped me, and I hope it helps others as well to understand that it's okay to be in that safe space as well. I think that's a nice place to be, especially, as things are shifting and changing in the world.
And I was going to say, I think if we can find that safety within ourselves, regardless of what's going on around us, our home is always within us, right? And that safety is always within us first.
Yeah, thank you. Home is
My joy.
always in here. I appreciate you,
I
Brigitte.
appreciate you too. I love our chats, Rashida.
I know, I love this. Thank you so much, Brigitte. Appreciate it. Guys, please check out Brigitta. Like, every time I listen, I'm like, man, I'm gonna schedule, even me, I'm gonna schedule a session with Brigitta because I would love to be able to, I guess the word is like, be in your care, right?
Thank you.
And to be able to really harness the things that are within me. I feel like you are that person that can unlock it. I know that you do that for many, but that's what comes up is you can unlock it. And I'm very grateful and thankful that you come
Yes.
on and have these great conversations. Guys, check out the Hera Collective. You can go in for like symptoms, ailments, practitioner, like whatever. If you just vibe with somebody, you're listening to this episode and you're like, yes, Brigitte is the one, you can jump on the website and click and book with her, like literally a click away. Because what? A click away is amazing. So, yes, thank you once again, Brigitte.
Thank you. Thank
This
you.
is the Ultimate Human Experience Podcast. We are out. Peace.